Dinner with Racers iRace,
Oh yeah.
like a trophy truck. It's pretty fun. We actually won. He's like he's a monster in those off-road things.
Really?
Me and Drew did. My friend Drew, our roommate from college.
Yeah.
They did most of the driving during the day. When I did that IMSA race at Sebring, the serious one, where I made it 4 corners off the pole. Yeah, we did that. We've been playing a lot of iRacing, but other than that,
Yeah.
I think he's not working so much with everything that's going on, so he's got a lot of free time.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet.
Working remotely, at least, yeah.
Cool. I haven't talked to him since I know Preston's been up to see him.
Yeah.
Detroit.
Yeah, they were thinking about doing some off-road race, maybe. I heard. I don't know.
Really?
But I think that fell apart. Maybe that was Pinky and Preston. I forget.
Yeah,
but
Pinky's always got all sorts of like concoctive ideas in the works that you never know if they're real or not.
Yeah, but Evan plays a lot of iRacing or dirt rally, a lot of sim games these days.
Yeah, I did a lot of when Evan lived at because he like lived in the basement. After we fired Mikey.
Yeah.
And all right, we're live. And he played a lot of we did a lot of the dirt rally game. But did you ever do the Richard Burns rally?
That was on like a console, right? I played it once or twice, but
it was like an older.
Yeah, it was an older, like early 2000s, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I missed it.
Yeah, it was tons of fun. We did that. I played that more than I did iRacing when I had my sim set up in Auburn.
Yeah.
It was known to have really good like vehicle dynamics and like tire modeling and stuff for its time.
Yeah, just the graphics weren't very good.
Yeah, but it was tons of fun. I mean, I remember like getting really, really into that. Playing it a lot.
Yeah. I know a bunch of people that used to play that religiously for sure.
Yeah. Cool. So you got your sim set up behind us. What all are you what are you running?
Yeah, it's getting pretty serious these days. I don't know if you can see it. It's right there. So the most important part is probably a good gaming computer, just so you can run iRacing with good graphics, good internet, all that stuff. But it's kind of hard to see. The chassis is made out of 80/20 aluminum from a company in Europe called SimLab. It's pretty popular among sim racers, and a lot of other drivers also use their stuff. It's really stiff. What's cool is with the brakes and steering wheel that we have, the forces are really pretty high, similar to the real car. So you need a pretty stiff chassis just to be able to withstand all that stuff. So the chassis is
on your desk. It's
just
floppy.
Yeah, you get a lot of flex. Your inputs aren't so precise. And then the wheel is a SimuCube direct drive. So you can turn that thing up to mimic IndyCar steering forces and things like that with Huskenveld pedals, another company in Europe. Most of the stuff is European. And then a precision sim steering wheel. So it's a pretty serious setup with 3 screens. So you kind of have like a full wraparound type of deal. So you feel pretty immersed in the car, and your visuals are pretty similar. So it's cool. I've been spending lots and lots of time on it.
Yeah, it's right next to your bed, so you can just get out of bed.
It's pretty much what I do in the morning. Make some breakfast, see what's going on in iRacing. A couple of big serious races have gone down, which has been fun. It's a good way to kind of stay sharp and stay fit, while we're not doing too much.
Yeah. And you're in Miami now, right? So what part of Miami? I don't know if we really talked about.
I'm in downtown in what's called Brickell, right on the water. So I moved down here originally for some coaching opportunities, but it turned out to be a pretty nice place to be located as a driver. Normally in normal times I spend probably 2-3 days a week at home. So it's a nice place to chill out, look at the water. I'm liking it a lot. It's quite different from where I grew up or where you and I both went to school. I still go to school online, but
a little bit
where we lived at in Auburn. So it's been somewhat of an adjustment, but I enjoy the weather and it's a good place to train. There's a pretty good racing community down here, a lot of karting going on and stuff like that. So I think it's it's been a good move, bit of an adjustment, but liking it for sure.
Right on. That's awesome, man. Well, we're got some folks on here watching us, so we're just kind of filling in some time so people can join and chat. But if you guys have questions for Robby, I mean, it's Robby friggin' Foley right here, people. He's here to answer your questions. So if you guys want to know what it's like, I don't know, driving a sim that's got a direct drive setup that's hardcore, ask away. Or if you want to know what it's like, living a day in the life of an IMSA racer, we'll do a little bit of an intro here in a second once people join. But ask us questions in the comments as we go, and I'll be following the comments and we'll get back to you. But we're going to talk a little bit about, who Robby is, what he's doing, maybe go into some coaching stuff and get ultimately some advice from what you might be able to use kind of some of the racecraft and skills that Robby's learned at honing his craft. So, thanks for taking the time, man. I know you got a lot of racing to do on the sim, so it's
thanks for having me.
Find time for this kind of stuff.
Always fun to bench race a little bit.
Yeah, right on. Well, we're all in this weird limbo at the moment, so I figured the best we can do is at least provide a little entertainment for folks and answer some questions.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, you all know me. I'm Andrew. Thanks for joining as we do around this time, one day a week for the most part on Facebook Live. Yesterday we had Joseph from Corsa Crew talking about track prep and tire pressures and some stuff like that. We had some trouble with the feed on Facebook, so we'll probably circle back to him and do more of that in the future. But now we've got full-time IMSA racer Robby Foley here with us, and Robby also does a lot of driver coaching, doing some pretty serious sim racing apparently. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So thanks for hopping on board, Robby. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always good fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were on the show about a year ago, and we talked about kind of how data relates to to what you do and what you're looking at as far as data goes after a session. So today we're going to talk a little more about just like general, maybe some racecraft tips that you can use in your own driving, some stuff that is used at the professional level, and then mostly kind of want to be a Q&A. So when you guys see stuff come up, ask Robby, but let us know in the comments before we get started here, where are you watching from? What are you excited? What track are you excited to drive this year? Some stuff like that. So we can give you, have some more specific talking points, but let us know where you're watching from. Maybe what you've been doing in quarantine. What have you guys been doing? Maybe reviewing some Apex Pro data, doing some iRacing. So let us know where you're watching from, what you've been doing in quarantine. Robby, give us the 30-second intro. Who is Robby Foley?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll be quick. So I started, I'm Robby, 23 years old. I met Andrew back at Auburn where we both went to school. And like you said, now I'm racing full-time in IMSA for Turner Motorsport with BMW and also an SRO and GT4 with Flying Lizard. So I got my start relatively early on. My dad was an autocrosser in the SDCA. He had a Honda Civic that he was always working on when I was a kid. I kind of got a grassroots start in that. I started autocrossing in go-karts when I was 8. Did that from 8 to 12. Kind of took a break because I was too big. And then got my start back in cars when I was 14 following a bad leg injury that I had. I stopped playing stick and ball sports and decided to try to pursue my passion of racing. Cut in through Skip Barber. At the time, in previous ownership, they had a race series with a scholarship tied to Mazda. So I kind of took that as the best opportunity to go racing, mixed in with some SCCA club racing I did with my dad and his ITB Honda CRX. So I started in the Northeast doing that stuff, and then a little bit of the Skip Barber Regional Series where you could win scholarships to then move up. So I pursued that, won a lot of scholarship money to, kind of advance my career, which was a huge help financially. As everybody knows, it's an expensive sport. So that was a big help to get me to what you would call a sort of pro-am level with Mazda. Had a couple of good years with Mazda in MX-5 Cup and ST and in the former Continental Tire Sports Car Challenge, and that kind of got me into IMSA. And a few bits of luck and opportunity along the way. Then got to go to LMP3 and IMSA, and then GTD and IMSA with the same team. A few months later, then getting an opportunity to test with Turner after a new opportunity for them opened up to run a car for me and Bill Auberlin in some sprint races in 2018. And then 2019 came together for a full season. All the stars kind of aligned. We did 2019, finished second in the GTD championship, a couple of big wins, 5 podiums. So it's been
poles?
For
you,
2 poles, but only one counted, I guess, after tech. It's been cool. I look back now and it feels like it was just yesterday I started racing my dad's ITB car. It's been kind of a quick journey, but definitely thankful for all the opportunities I've had. I met a lot of cool people on the way, like Andrew, and a lot of friends down in Alabama and in the Southeast at my time at Auburn. And then lots of cool opportunities in racing to kind of pursue my dream and trying to still make it happen. Obviously, this year was a little bit of a dull one so far. We had one race in IMSA, one race in SRO, but hopefully when it's safe for everybody, we can go back to doing what we love.
Yeah, but at least you're racing in your bedroom, in the meantime. We already got a question. It's a good one. Eric Meyer. And Eric, you're a top fan, according to Facebook. Eric says, yo, who are the top IMSA sim drivers that you have your eye on?
It's interesting. I would say probably most of my a lot of BMW drivers as well, like Bruno Spengler, Nicky Katzberg, Jesse Krohn. Those were, I guess we were 1 through 4, I think, in qualifying, or we were all in the top 5 in qualifying for that big IMSA race. The BMW guys are very strong. BMW themselves have a big they're putting a big effort into sim racing these days, which is great. It's a great way to kind of tap into the grassroots world in a different way. Obviously, it kind of basically creates a new way for young or old or anyone to get into racing. So sim racing's been cool, but I would say, for sure, all the BMW factory guys are really strong on the sim.
Right on. Yeah, I saw in that IMSA race last weekend, the M8s were all at the front. So it was like the BMW kind of parade. And then you only made it a couple turns, which
we had small incidents.
Yeah, you mentioned last year, and we talked earlier a little bit about Petit. Petit Le Mans, you guys won literally on the last lap of the race. The car you were racing for the win ran out of fuel, and Bill was in the car. And you gave me a pretty cool story about how that all came together. But for folks that might have seen that race, I definitely watched. I mean, I pretty much watch all the IMSA races that I can because it's always really good stuff. But what happened strategy-wise in that race kind of quickly on the put you in that position? Because you were telling me, your driver change with Bill was kind of interesting. He wasn't ready because of how the yellow fell and that sort of thing. You got pushed off the track.
Yeah. So I guess Petit Le Mans is an interesting race. To start with, we didn't qualify very well. We had an issue in qualifying mechanically, so we started last or close to last. But that race is incredibly high-paced. You're never really, a lot of endurance races, even though there's kind of like sprint races nowadays, you take a more conservative approach. Petit Le Mans, you have to attack. So we did that all day, starting from the back, got to 4th in the first stint. And then from there, it was just attacking the leader. Eventually, we started to lead the race and led most of it. And there's kind of two different races going on within the race. There's what's called the North American Endurance Championship, which we weren't really in contention for because we had kind of a bad Daytona and Sebring, but we had a really good Watkins Glen and a good Petit. But still, we weren't really in for the win there. So we were basically just going for the win during the race. A couple other cars were racing for that championship. One was the Riley Mercedes, the 33 car. So they were quite, they became, the way the yellows fell, very off cycle because they were trying to collect points. I forget, to be honest, if it's every 2 hours or 3 hours, but there's certain hour marks during the race where you collect points. So I guess, long story short, we were slightly off strategy to them. Coming down into the last few hours, it was between the 29 Land Audi, ourselves in the 96 Turner BMW, and then the 33 Riley Mercedes. So we were all racing quite hard. We were leading most of the race, but we were slightly off cycle to the other two. So basically, we would lead, maybe, I don't know, a 10-second lead, something like that. We would pit, come back out slightly behind them, and they would pit off cycle. So basically, they were short filling to kind of try to close that gap and then hope for a yellow. So on one of the exchanges late in the race, there was about 2 stints to go. I had pitted, gone back out, and was probably 20 minutes or so into my stint, and the Riley Mercedes had pitted, and they came out with Felipe Fraga on fresh tires right out of the pits. I was coming through turn 1. They timed it well, to be fair. I sort of passed him. Then there was an LMP2 car slow in turn 3. We got stacked up. I was behind him. Fraga got next to me again on the right, and then kind of hit me over the curb, kind of hit me off into the grass. I went in the grass, kind of dug up some dirt, and the right front tire kind of started to go down with a slow leak. So we had to pit right away. At that time, there was such little time left in the race, maybe a stint and a half. Bill was going to get in to finish. So he basically wasn't supposed to get in the car for 30 minutes, so he scrambled to put his stuff on. I came in the pit box, and our driver changes are quite fast these days, like 15 seconds or so. So I'm like halfway out of the car before I even realize that he's not there. So I'm like, crap, I should probably get back in. So I get back in, like half strap myself in, and then he like appears. And so I get back out. It was kind of a mess. But honestly, we actually didn't lose any time in the stop because our fuel and tires fuel takes about 40 seconds. So it sort of worked out, and we then became off cycle from ourselves, and we then were more on cycle with the others. It's kind of hard to explain, but
yeah,
we were then running second, kind of swapped the lead back and forth. But essentially, the 33 and ourselves were both short on fuel because they were always short on fuel, and we became short on fuel because we couldn't run.
Because you stopped early.
Stint, exactly. So
yeah,
it's kind of convoluted, but long story short, we were second. Fraga was leading, Bill was second, and they were racing hard. At the end, we were kind of going flat out. They were saving a bit of fuel, but it was nose to tail. Bill was getting closer and closer and closer, attacking. And then on the last lap, he got a little look to the inside into the S's, and then right at that point, the Mercedes ran out of fuel. So it was just Bill in the 29 Audi with Chris Smees in the car, and he brought it home, it was a cool victory in itself. Just obviously to win Petit Le Mans my first try, but it was Bill's 60th win to tie Scott Pruitt for the most all time, and it was his birthday. Yeah. So you got to
that's huge. That last lap was intense. Obviously, passing the last lap, but that whole thing about how he, Fraga kind of pushed you off track, and that's what forced you to pit, which then is what put you on cycle to be able to kind of run that strategy. And then the fact that they ended up running out of fuel is kind of like.
Yeah, we actually got a lucky yellow, I forgot to mention, that was just long enough for us to make it, but just short enough for them to not make it. So it kind of worked out perfectly. Maybe some karma acting, but who knows? Yeah, it was good.
Kevin asked, what are some of the challenges with multi-class racing? And this is something we talked about a little bit when we were chatting earlier.
Yeah.
But what are the challenges, and maybe how can people apply some of those challenges to, track days or endurance racing that folks watching might be doing?
Yeah, for sure. It's all relevant. I would say just in a general sense, you have 4 different classes that all have to coexist on the same racetrack, and they all make their speed in very different ways. GTD happens to be the slowest. The GT3 car is still a very, very fast race car, but the slowest of the 4. Then you have GTLM, LMP2, and then DPI being the fastest. So for us in GT cars, we're much slower than the DPIs in a general sense. So we're always getting passed by them. LMP2s are significantly faster as well, at least in the corners. And then the GTLM cars are relatively close to us, but still quicker in the corners and a little bit on the top end, depending on the track. So for us, it's difficult to kind of basically give and take. Obviously, an endurance race, especially the Rolex 24, you're a little bit more cautious early on. At least you should be in theory, to kind of give each other a little bit more room. The difficult thing is just adapting to where the other cars are quicker than you. So for us in the GT3 cars, GTD, we're basically trying to position ourselves in a way that we lose the least amount of time being passed, which sometimes is actually defending on the prototype, letting the prototype go around the outside, which they don't mind, and things like that. For me, a lot of times it's about putting myself in the least vulnerable position. So if there's a row of prototypes coming behind all racing, I want to put myself in a position where I can't get hit. Because even if it's not my fault and they're on the inside and one of them screws up and hits you in the door and you have damage, yeah, it's not your fault, but you're still, damaged, could be out of the race. So for myself, it's always about minimizing
the face coronavirus.
Yeah, exactly. I have a bad habit.
Just trying to keep it fun. I do it too.
I'll sit on my hands. Yeah.
What do I do with my hands?
Yeah, Ricky Bobby. So it's critical just to position yourself in a place where you're not vulnerable. Now, in racing inside of our own class, it's easy to have contact or race hard and race close, and that's maybe something that applies to anything, a DE, a track day, a club race, is etiquette and how you position your car against others to pass. You and I were talking a little bit about this earlier. Not leaving too much space between a car. Mm-hmm. If you're racing someone, or if you pointed someone by and you're taking a point by, you're passing someone, it's actually the most advantageous to, obviously you don't want to rub mirrors, but to be as close as possible, probably within a few feet, just to be safe. But one, that leaves you out of someone's blind spot. And obviously you don't want this, but if you have contact, it's actually way, way less severe than if you have more separation and somebody kind of spears you like at a perpendicular angle at the apex. And you see that a lot in racing, where the car behind is very, very aggressive and eager to get by, and they make a really late dive and they just drive straight to the apex. And the person that's in front has no idea, and they've turned in already. And this person on the inside was in the blind spot, and they just get collected and hit in the door. So
yeah, that happens all the time in multi-class, especially like Champ Car, WRL stuff you guys are doing. Sometimes people force those passes and they end up with a lot of space, and they just shoot the gap into the apex, right?
You just want to make sure you're seen and visible and predictable. And obviously spatial awareness is key, but if you're being overtaken, you want to be A, predictable to the car behind, but B, you also want to dictate how you get past. And that's what I focus on a lot in GTD is basically dictating how the prototype or the faster class car will pass me, so I lose the least amount of time and I don't become vulnerable to them.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's annoying for them because they have to go around the outside or whatever, but it doesn't leave, if you leave the inside open, you could always get doored if they lock up or, go in a bit deep, where if you're on the inside, they just go wide. So
you're really deliberate with your car position and
that's how, that's how you communicate as well. A good example is going into the bus stop. If there's a prototype way back, but she's gonna close very fast, and you want to make sure they don't go basically to the inside, you kind of can do a little bit of basically like a defensive move to the left, just to be like, hey, you better wait, type of thing. Yeah. So for ourselves and IMSA, there's a lot of that communication going on, and most of the time, I would say it's especially in like the long endurance races, it's pretty respectful, and people are speaking the same language. Obviously, when you get to the end of the race and you're fighting for the win, it becomes more aggressive, and that all sort of maybe goes out the window. But you can definitely take lessons learned from both, and and apply, but you always just want to be in control of your own situation if possible. Oftentimes when somebody is made, call it a victim where, the person behind obviously made a mistake and hit you in the door or spun you around, at least I always ask myself, what could I have done differently to make it not happen? The same applies to a DE environment where you're all trying to coexist. You're sharing the racetrack. And you're all trying to have a good time with different speeds of car, Miata versus car with 500 horsepower. I've driven both and been equally frustrated at, people in
the other one.
Cars. So, yeah, I mean,
totally.
Just that knowledge is, and being in control of your own situation, I think is.
Yeah. So being situationally aware, and then also being able to communicate with the placement of the car. Those seem like two really good. And you also said something that's critical. And this is, I talk about this a lot. And guys, if you're watching, you probably heard this before, but when you make a pass on another car, don't swing and give them an acre of space between your car and their car, right? Stay close, because just think about where they're able to see. And like you said, especially in a DE environment, I would say a DE is a lot more similar to like a long race that you're doing, like the Rolex 24, where especially for the first several hours of the race until really the race shakes out, you're really trying to facilitate clean passes, and everybody's, I don't want to say they're working together, but you're putting the car where the other driver is, and you're communicating deliberately. So at a DE environment, you can absolutely do that. And you also have point buys at a DE environment, so you can be really deliberate with how you get people by you. So when you're being passed, there's a lot more to it than just being overtaken. And if you take it a step further and you're racing a champ car race or a WRL race, these same lessons apply. I know that when we first talked about the Rolex 24 and you were telling me how deliberate you were to get GTLM cars by because the pace is so similar, I really took a lot of that to heart and applied it in WRL, because there's a lot of situations where you're racing around cars that, the driver may not be able to drive the faster car faster. So they have more potential, but you're a little faster. And so managing how you get around them, and if there's an art to it.
Right.
Got a couple more questions already, man. Marlon Sumlin, you might know him from Mazda days.
Yeah, totally.
Marlon, Mazda through and through. Marlon says, what's been one of the major factors in your improvement from when you started an ST with Freedom to where you are now?
That's a good question. I have to think about that actually a little bit.
We can come back to it if we need to, if you want to move on.
I think I got it. I would say the biggest thing is this is very general, so hopefully it makes sense in the end, but just being able to adapt. The cars I started growing up, or the cars I started racing growing up, were very, very different than the cars I'm racing now. So when I took the step from the ST car to say the LMP3, I was in a sense a little lost with just the way the car felt. Starting from my dad's Honda CRX all the way up to the ST car, the feeling you get out of the car, at least in terms of like the G load and how you brake and the way the brake pedal feels and all that stuff, was fairly similar. Then take that to a prototype or a GT3 car where the braking technique is totally different. The cornering speeds are totally different. All that stuff's totally different. Just the ability to adapt on the fly and take in information. I was lucky to have good teammates along the way that I could kind of learn off of straight away. But probably my ability to just be open-minded and kind of analyze while I'm driving what's going on, not kind of do the same sort of mistake or repetition over and over, go out, drive a new car at a new track, maybe in a WeatherTech session, my first time in GTD at a given track, and try to kind of piece together a lap, just from adapting to, looking at video and data and other things like that, because what I was driving from 15 all the way to, 20 or so was all the same sort of car with the same kind of driving style, line, everything like that. Everything now has been totally new. So hopefully that makes sense. But just the ability to adapt. Obviously, someone with talent is talented and you can apply that talent, but the techniques are completely different. So
and you made a huge jump that one year that you went from basically Skip Barber and then ST cars, all Miata-based cars, and then you went to LMP3, which is a step further. Like GTD would be more similar.
Yeah,
LMP3 is
exactly.
like off the deep end.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
over double the horsepower. Like my first experience with downforce, I'm sitting on the right side of the car. My feet are at my eye level. I'm sitting like this,
Yeah.
just quite
Totally
different.
different.
The first time I drove the car was at Palm Beach, which, if any of you know, that track is pretty slow and not very many high-speed corners. And then the first race was at Watkins Glen with no testing. First practice got rained out, went straight into the second practice, I think, if I remember right. And I was like totally blown away because I knew the S's were flat and I was doing them flat, but I had never felt those G's and that feeling in my body before. You turn in and you're like, your head falls over the first couple of times because you're not expecting it.
Yeah.
I've always heard of people training their neck, and I always thought my neck was strong. And after 45 minutes, I can't hold my head up. So there's
different than a Miata,
Yeah, there's certainly things that you have to adapt to that are just very, very different. And I would say, my time in LMP3 was good because it was so different. I had an open mind, and then when I went back to GT3, it was almost like taking a step back in terms of how quickly everything's happening.
Yeah.
Coming from a ST car or a MX-5, everything's happening pretty slow, and everything's like telegraphed to you what's happening. With a car, this prototype is very, very on edge and a little bit more snappy and alive. It's not like an LMP2, which is a little bit more glued to the ground. The P3 moves around a lot, but at a very high limit. So we were on a tire that was pretty hard at the time too. So you were always chasing the car on the limit, and I wasn't quite comfortable with that limit right away. So I guess in an effort to not talk about it for ages, I would say just the ability to adapt to something new quickly was the biggest thing I had to learn.
Yeah. I'll offer my input on it too, because I mean, why not? We're here. But you've driven, you drove my car when I was in World Challenge. You coached me and really helped me understand some of the concepts that I now put into practice a lot and every day, really. And I think you're analytically processing, you're thinking through exactly what you're doing. Like you said, you're trying not to do the same thing twice, and you experiment a lot and try things differently, and you're always drilling into why something's happening, not just accepting it. It's like, why is the car behaving this way, constantly over and over, trying to figure that out with everything. And then also I think you have the humility to ask other people for their advice, because like with Kenton, your relationship with him and other guys like that had been like a step ahead of you kind of on the ladder.
Right.
Me, at least from afar, it seemed like you were they were willing to share a lot of information with you that not everybody has that.
Yeah, totally. I was very lucky to have that, and just the ability to compare to guys like Kenton and Bill and everybody, all my teammates, that I've been able to, maybe make the step a bit easier. When I went from Skip Barber MX-5 to Global MX-5 Cup, really there was not much adapting. Same from MX-5 to FT. There was a few differences, especially the way the tire behaved, but I didn't feel completely out of place in the ST car. When you go from the ST car to a prototype, you feel out of place.
Yeah, totally different.
It just takes some time, and I was lucky to have a good opportunity at the time with P1 Motorsports, where I got that time basically that I needed. That was critical. They were a new team starting up and just looking for some results to kind of build a customer base, and together with some guys that I knew from Speed Source and Kenton, and a lot of Mazda guys kind of through and through. I basically got that opportunity to have a few races at the end of 2017 to kind of make that jump, and then from there it was easier progression into GTD, and even silly things like there's so much more going on with the car. Like the steering wheel has 16 buttons. In the MX-5 there's a radio button,
Right.
In the ST car there's a few more things, obviously, but you have different functions and engine maps and stuff. They're telling you stuff on the radio, so it's overwhelming at first, and then just having a couple of races to learn and adapt was everything, for sure. Just to be able to be competitive kind of in a short amount of time. I think I was lucky for sure to have that opportunity.
That's huge. So that adaptability is really the key. We've got some more questions coming in, and we got Evan Maynard on here with us. And Patrick Wilmot, got a bunch of mutual friends on here. And
Awesome.
Ryan Burkert's question is, during an endurance race, how much time in between stints is spent reviewing your data, whether it's yours or your teammates? And then we've got got at least one more question right after that. So
Cool. I guess by the time the race comes, honestly, you're not really doing so much data review. We have live telemetry in the pits, so if there's something drastically wrong, a lot of times we're looking at braking techniques to eliminate brake wear. I would say that's really the only data we're looking at. Most of if we're comparing between teammates to find each other some speed, it's mostly during the practices. Honestly, in an endurance race between your stints, normally these days with just the pace of the races and everything and doing single, double, triple stints, you're so exhausted after a stint, it's more about just rehabbing yourself for the next one. So especially at Daytona, you're trying to get sleep, which is more difficult than it sounds, and things like that. So I have like a little routine where I get out of the car and I usually eat a little bit of food and then just try to lay low and stretch a little bit. And obviously Daytona, you're doing a large volume of stints, so you're trying to keep yourself as fresh as possible. So really no data review there. A couple, maybe occasionally you'll talk to one of the engineers about certain braking technique, brake pressure, or different bias or ABS setting for us in the GTD car. There's lots of things you can adjust to try to save the brakes or do something different. I would probably just say it's all data review during the race is all footwork related, on the throttle to save fuel maybe, or in different fuel maps, or brake wear with brake application.
So you'd say you're more of, it's not necessarily data review, you're more of kind of, it's kind of a status check, and then maybe like, I was thinking about changing this technique, maybe I should look at that. But you already know you've already done the data review essentially.
Yeah,
we're already doing it after the race.
Yeah, we're pretty much driving to the limit that we can. During certain times of the race, we're told to not push quite as hard. Maybe, you're still pushing, but, take no risk. Sometimes in the race, you have to catch the guy ahead of you, and it's pushing as hard as you possibly can with all the risk in the world. I would say if you get out of the car, you discuss with the engineers maybe for a few minutes. You might go to the back of the timing stand, look at the telemetry screen, and, compare brake pressures and trail off phase of the corner and, certain things to maybe limit the brake wear. For us, that's a big thing, especially at Daytona. We have to do one brake change. So you're trying to give yourself a window where you can do it under yellow. And these days with the quality of drivers, there's not a lot of yellows. So you don't want to do it under green. So you're trying to make the brakes live as long as physically possible to have as big of a window. Plus, if you make them go long, you can push at the end. So I would say, long story short, that's really the only data review we're doing mid-race.
That makes sense. On that same vein, Eric's wondering what is BMW's role with what you do at Turner. So is your data engineer, a BMW guy, Turner guy? What is their role in the program kind of look like?
Yeah, so we're very lucky in the sense to have a great relationship with BMW. All of the guys, I guess the best way to describe it, all the guys on the timing stand that are running the car during the sessions and during the race are all Turner people. So guys that Will has worked with for many years and trusts, and they have amazing knowledge and have run everything from World Challenge touring cars, Continental Tire ST cars, to now Michelin Pilot Challenge GS, GT, GT3, everything in between. So they're very, very knowledgeable. They've been with him for years. So they're all Turner people. And then we have great support from really the top levels of engineering at BMW that are at the track as well. They're just more with the M8s during the sessions, and then we kind of work with them after the sessions and what we need out of the car. We do have an engineer from BMW for calibration and basically one that runs the ECU and stuff on our timing stand. Two great guys, Clay and Dusty, normally from BMW that help us with ABS, TC, engine mapping, different boost targets when they adjust BOP for the barometric pressure. So they're basically in charge of they're basically like running the car in a diagnostic way or making some adjustments to our ECU maps and things like that. But as far as like chassis engineering and general like electronics and stuff or running the car, it's all
Turner.
Turner, yeah.
There's a couple more questions specifically about the Turner thing. Chris says, well, first of all, Patrick Wilmot says, how do I grow up to be like Robby Foley or to be Robby Foley? And I told him, I said, eat tacos. That was my best.
I only recently started eating tacos more. I don't really have a choice at this point, but I don't know. I mean,
play football and get hurt, maybe?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't recommend that, but honestly, I would probably, if I didn't get hurt, I would probably maybe play football and then potentially play like low-level college football and never would have ended up in this position. So for me, it was all circumstantial to even start racing. I honestly never saw it as something attainable. As everybody knows, it's a little bit difficult with just funding and things like that. So I kind of just had a couple of lucky breaks. I caught I literally got the last Skip Barber scholarship before they went bankrupt, before they were bought out. And obviously now the company's doing better now. But I got the last scholarship there, which was at the time like $100,000. So I probably won $350,000 in scholarships, which don't exist anymore. So I just feel very fortunate to have been able to take advantage of that, honestly. And now there's different ways to kind of go about it, but it's interesting. It's a weird sport. I have a lot of friends that are in the pro ranks of baseball and football that I used to play with, and it's a very straightforward path to get to a pro level. You're either good enough or you're not, and that's not the case with racing. There's a lot of really talented people that don't have any opportunity just due to circumstances out of their control. So I guess, without breaking my leg and without some really lucky breaks and some help from people along the way, I wouldn't be here. So
tacos every night or every other night?
Usually just on Tuesdays, but I'll be honest, I don't eat them every week. But for us, I guess the story behind all that was there's like racetracks can be in weird places, as everybody knows, where there's not much going on. But normally, I would say pretty much at every racetrack in North America, you can find a Mexican restaurant like within a 30-mile radius.
Oh, yeah.
So sometimes when you go to the middle of nowhere, there's always Mexican food. So I guess the guys before my time started eating a lot of Mexican, and then it just kind of caught on. And everybody thinks it's like a bigger thing than it is, but Will just really likes tacos and Mexican and tequila. So
yeah, hey, why not? Eric Meyer, Añejo tequila, the dark stuff. It's been aged a year. That's no hangovers. It's delicious. So Evan Maynard getting into the comment game. Evan, I hope you're doing well, man. He also commented and said, glad to see we're still at the office. I think there's only 4 of us working here right now, so we're staying socially distant from each other. But
6 feet away.
Yeah, it's definitely taking its toll, but it's we'll survive. So hope you're still working and everything up there, Evan. Need to hang out soon. Apparently, you and Robby were doing some stadium super truck racing. But Evan says, how intrusive as a driver are the politics of the sport?
That's a good question. I would say massively. But it's interesting. The politics, what I've noticed is racing in that kind of sense, no matter what level you're at, but the politics change slightly through the different series. I would say you always just want to be on the right side of it. Sometimes you're unlucky in those certain situations. Politically, there's lots of different factors that can contribute to your own success. One thing that I've always tried to do is just be myself.
Coronavirus, don't touch your face.
Yeah, I keep doing that.
I'm just here. It's just funny. It's a good opportunity to mess with you.
I would say like just try to be myself, and I had a good point that I totally forgot now. But I had some good advice, a few times, basically to just try to control the things that are in your control. And if you maximize your effort and ability to do those things and basically control your own performance to the best of your ability, the other stuff is just going to happen. And obviously, you just try to be yourself. At least I do, and just I genuinely love what I do in racing, and I just genuinely love being there in the environment. So for me, it's easy. I love the relationship I have with all the guys and the crew, and generally we've become quite close and just all wanting the same thing, which is to win and to try to achieve success together over time. And I think, when you can have that relationship with the people around you, it becomes a little bit easier to go through the ups and downs and the political BS that none of us really want to deal with. We do it because we love it. But, there's, we have a lot of responsibility to do a good job, and we kind of report to a lot of people to do a good job. So it's a stressful environment, and politics, people have different motivations, and that drives the politics of the sport. But I think if you just control what you can control and be yourself, that's at least the best you can do.
Yeah. I mean, that's good life advice, really. But, and I definitely would say, as long as I've known you, you haven't been one to dwell on stuff that you can't control, where a lot of what you hear with people, especially trying to make it in racing, where there's so many cost barriers, and you really need to find, funding to get there, is people complaining about stuff that they can't control. And really just kind of have to, like you said, you've made some really cool opportunities happen just because you were focused on what you did have available to you and what you did have going for you, and not on what you couldn't, particularly.
Yeah. And obviously, everybody's situation is different, for sure. But I mean, a couple of times, particularly like at the end of 2016, and then as 2017 began, I was kind of like, all right, this is not going so great. I had a decent year in MX5 Cup, and then I got to do a few races in ST, and then that opportunity in ST kind of evaporated. And there was like a month to do, and it was difficult. And then the LMP3 opportunity came along, so it was. I think everybody goes through that. Obviously, I was lucky to get out of it and tried my hardest to keep going. I think everybody faces those challenges. Just fortunate that I, had the opportunities I did.
Yeah, and you work. I mean, I think it's a given that you're here and you work hard. But when I say like you're trying to drill down into why the car's doing what it's doing, like you do the same thing with iRacing. You're like, okay, how do I figure this out? And there's no deadline. There's no like, you're just trying to get the most out of the car. You have a very a methodical approach to racing, and it's like it never stops, and you're able to continue pushing yourself to understand the car extremely well and understand how you can get the most out of it. And I think we got a really good question here, by the way, but I think that's really important. Chris Nicely says, is the M8 the biggest car you've ever driven on track?
I would say, definitely. Although I did do that race with Evan and Drew on iRacing in that truck, which was pretty big as well. But yeah, what's cool, like the M6 is also a big car. What's cool about that is it's hard to pass you. So, you definitely have some advantages in that. There's some disadvantages, but it's just the package you're given, so you try to make the best of it. I personally think both the M6 and the M8 are two very badass-looking race cars. They're very unique in their own way, and they're probably bigger than the rest, but there's some advantages and disadvantages to that, just like having a small race car. So
yeah, I mean, you got to embrace the internet, memes and stuff of the big M8. I mean, it is what it is, right? It's let's start wrapping it up here, and we'll close here in a few minutes. But what advice can you? Evan said the Accord wasn't the smallest car either.
It's a good point. I didn't race that one, but I drove it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it was pretty big.
Yeah,
Evan made it real slippery though. Maybe we'll have to have Evan on sometime. Evan, if you can hear my voice, you should come on and talk about how you made that Accord so freaking fast in a straight line. We got to Road America with that car. I think the event that you were coaching me at.
Yeah.
car weekend, and we were the fastest in a straight line. I distinctly remember like being like a mile per hour or two faster than anybody.
Yeah.
The car ate an entire set of brake pads in a 40-minute race, but other than that,
you gotta slow that thing down at all that speed. Yeah, it definitely. You could carry some groceries in that thing too. It was a
oh
cool.
yeah,
It was a cool. It was a very unique car for sure, and it sounded amazing.
it
It's a
did have a
very
good sound. It was the handling characteristics were odd.
yes.
Evan
Oh,
says
they
he's
were.
down, so Evan's booked. It was it pushed like absolutely nobody's business in the slow speed stuff, but
Yeah,
once you
but
drove it and gave me kind of your synopsis on it, and you made some setup adjustments and stuff, that helped a lot.
yeah, the diff was cool on that car though. You could kind of make the diff work to help you around those low speed corners. But yeah, it was
Oh yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, a lot of heat in the front end was all.
Yeah,
Evan can talk about that when we get him on here, with big tires and a diff and a decent amount of horsepower, a V6 and a front wheel drive layout. It's like the front of the car got so hot that
it's all happening up there. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, most of the time your front wheel drive cars too are 4-cylinder turbos, and they're not as taking up as much space as
Yeah.
as the big
The
V6
robust
drivetrain was.
vehicle. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a fun time. We'll have Evan on and talk a little bit about that. But Robby, what advice can you give for people that are watching? For we talked a little bit, and we intended to go down a little bit more about what you spend most of your time doing, which is coaching and helping other drivers. But maybe give us a quick, what it's like coaching drivers that you also race with, and then kind of what you would sum up like, hey, if you're out there in the DE space, or you're doing some endurance racing, what do you see that people do, maybe the guys that you coach, that they should be focused on? What should people be focused on getting better at?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to that. One is a mental barrier that a lot of people have is like I try to take the approach, and it's easier said than done, and I'm definitely not perfect at it, but I try to remove emotion from the driving in some way, like you said, and when we worked together, just being very analytical and trying to understand everything that you can about what's happening. And for me, just sometimes I'm like a little bit of a robot, I've been told. I don't know, where I try to not involve too much emotion in just like, obviously if I have a bad race or if I get punted off the road or something, I'm going to be a little annoyed, but if I don't have a good session and I'm slow or something, why is that happening? And let's fix it, type of thing. So that's one approach. And that applies to anything. Someone at a DE event that's just brand new starting out. A lot of people are so ego driven and eager to go fast. They're not really worried about how they're going to go fast. They just want to go fast. So if you remove the emotion and just, kind of take a steady fundamental approach, the learning curve will still be steep, but I feel like, it's a good way to be efficient in how you're learning. If you're, driven by your ego and you're trying to go faster than your buddy and you're not really worried about it, you're just driving over your head, it's no good. So being able to control your emotions, ego, and everything like that, I think is a major step that anyone can really apply from, like a DE entry level, autocrossing level, all the way up to pro racing. So that's the mental side. And then, I think for myself, now a lot of the racing that we do in sports cars is sort of a pro-am format. So I coach some people that I race with, and like certain techniques that you see, and a lot of it stems from kind of an interpretation of a way that people are taught to drive at the beginning of their careers, and I don't like this terminology, but people say that coasting is bad, which it is in a sense. Coasting, not changing speed, is bad, but being off the pedals is not bad as long as you're slowing down. So kind of drives me insane is like people have developed a habit over time, some that I've worked with, that they have this mentality they should always be on or off the brake, which is so not true, or they should always be on the gas or on the brake, which is not true. And it's a habit that people learn that it's hard to get them out of it. So for instance, this happens 9 times out of 10. Someone will brake, they'll brake early and a little bit light, so they're not efficient the way they slow the car down. So if you look at like a speed trace, it's a very lazy, loss of speed. They're
The
early and
shallower
light.
angle.
They're early and
more
light
like
on the
this.
brake. Yep, exactly. They're early and light on the brake. They get into what I call no man's land, where they realize they're too slow, so they lift off the brake in pressure. Then they have to go back to it, and the whole progression of the corner is wrong. Then they get to the center of the corner, and they actually have too much speed in the center. Or at the turn, and maybe they have they're a little bit under the limit, or they have too little speed, so they pick up the throttle too early, and then they're late to full throttle because they're always doing something on the pedals. Where if you brake late and aggressively, you have a good efficient speed trace, drop off, start to turn in with a nice linear trail off the brake, there's like this coasting period, but the car is still slowing down to the apex, but it's rotating. You're letting the car turn, and then you pick up the throttle and go. But a lot of people disrupt that happening mainly because they haven't entered probably quick enough. They trail off the brake too early. They add the wheel. They pick up the throttle, lift the front and basically create this understeer. And then they pick up the throttle early, but they're late to full throttle. So I've often seen many times, turn 5 at Barber is a really good example, where I'm like 50 feet later to the throttle than someone, but my exit's better because you're nearly straight to full throttle.
Yeah.
So I would say, a lot of, obviously at a pro level, that's not what's taught, but sometimes early on people learn these bad habits in their driving career. So always being open to that and adapting. And, if you find yourself going through every corner with like an understeer and you're pushing wide and you're on part throttle and you're late to full throttle, then your problem probably isn't at the center of the corner. It probably started back when you hit the brakes. So I guess
that's very common.
That's a theme that I've seen a lot. And I see that, even with people that are very, very good, that are a few seconds off of like a pro pace, that's a very, very common trend.
I think when I reflect on my progression driving as well, I think that's the fundamental concept maybe that I had to work through my brain before I was really able to and what I would define as being able to drive a car at the limit of its capabilities, or very close to it, within a few percent of it. And you drove my car and we overlaid our data, and I think we saw some of those differences there. But I see that really commonly, that exact thing that you're referencing, which is usually fixed by just being a little more patient on your throttle application initially. And when I say fixed, I mean the first step in fixing it, because there's a lot that has to happen, right?
Totally. Even if you mess up the entry, if you're just a little bit more patient to the throttle and you let the car turn like the last little bit and the nose is pointed where you want to go, you're going to get to full throttle sooner, and your exit is going to be much more efficient.
And you might not even be faster on that lap or in that sector or whatever, but you've just taught yourself the proper technique.
And you'll be more consistent, and you'll also be easier on the tires because you're not basically scrubbing the fronts. And a lot of times people
hanging that front end out.
Yeah, you'll hang the front end out and have understeer, and then once you like kind of push through that and the car slows down to the point where the front gains grip, then you can get a snap oversteer on the limit. So obviously there's variance in that, and it applies to different cars, and different cars require slightly different techniques, but in general the fundamental theory is the same. And I think just applying that basic fundamentals is quite important.
No, I think maybe at some point in the future we should host like a webinar or something and maybe talk about that, because I've found that one, I struggled with that when I reflect and think about my driving progression, and two, I find that it's not really very difficult to explain, but I find that teaching the friction circle and what it visually represents helps people understand that, because essentially what you're doing when you're off the pedals in the middle of the corner is the car is usually at or near maximum lateral G, the maximum amount that the tire can attain in lateral loading. And at that point, you cannot apply the brakes or the throttle, right? You cannot ask the tire to do more. And if you have that understanding of where am I on the friction circle almost while you're driving, it makes it easier to and Ross Bentley, I'll have to attribute this to him because I learned the way that he phrased it, but he doesn't call it a wait or a coast. He calls it a hesitation.
Yeah.
That release of the brake, and then sometimes you have to hesitate before you go back to throttle.
Yeah,
but
which is totally true. And I think, it's one of those things that it's really common and something that, I think a lot of drivers can find a limit, like you said, at the apex or somewhere near the apex when they're basically at that max load of the tire and they feel the car slide. So to them, in their brain computes it, okay, I'm driving this at the maximum, which they are at that given point of the corner. But what's the most difficult thing to teach, at least for me, is the trailing off the brake phase and how you load the tire basically in the two directions, and basically how it takes two loads. Now every tire is a little bit different, and some take two loads very well, and you can trail a lot of brake to the apex and it accepts it. Some no brake but the idea is the same of just basically, like you say, the friction circle and how you're using the tire on the way to the apex. And that brake release is where I've found most people need to work on to find the last little bit of time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that when you look at the difference between your data and your driving versus, someone that's doing this at the club level or that's not a professional, right? Doesn't have the amount of reps you have and frankly have the experience and the peer group that you have.
Right.
That's usually the difference, right? A lot of times, even if the technique mimics, like if we were to look at our data together, I'm willing to bet us driving the same car, I would probably have a similar technique approach as far as aggressive application of the brakes, slow the car down efficiently, and then release into the corner. But I'm willing to bet you would brake either a little later or maybe a little lighter, depending on the corner. Your release would happen in a slightly different place, and you'd probably be to wide open throttle a little bit sooner. And you'd probably do those tiny little things. And we're talking like differences between feet on the racetrack, maybe a little more, maybe yards. And it would probably add up to a second or more over a lap.
Yeah, which isn't a lot if you think about a second and you think about a place like, I'll use Barber again because we were both sort of from there for a while. You have 16, 17 corners there. That's not a lot of time. That's a tenth here, half a tenth there. It's very minute. So if you find yourself, I don't know, 3 seconds, 3.5 seconds off your coach, you're really not doing a bad job. And it's, I've worked with a lot of people from when they were quite new in driving to now very advanced, from being 15 seconds off the pace to now 3. And again, when they're 3 seconds off the pace, it's a bit more frustrating because it's little tiny things where you really find the time. But I would say that's accurate, and just those little things add up to quite a bit of lap time.
Yeah, and don't underestimate how critical those really minute things are, because that's what we're all focused on, and that's why we have to use data to define it, because most of the time we're talking about stuff that is very hard to measure subjectively. It's very hard for you to say, even if we go off of subjective measurements, I'm applying the brake at the 3 board. Well, you're not. You're just not. You may think you are. You may be applying it after the 3 board. You may be applying it before the 3 board. You don't really know, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah, and the other thing too is you and I would describe what we're doing the exact same. So that's why data is critical, because our technique in theory is the same in turn 5 at Barber, I'm sure. And then if you look at the data, there's minor discrepancies, right, which then make the time, but we would describe what we want to do in the corner the exact same. So I think that's important. Another element of why what you guys do is so cool with Apex and just data in general is that little, you have to modify very small things in your driving to really find the extra time. Obviously, people, are looking for varying degrees of lap time, but it's all relevant, really.
Right. Whether it's a second or it's 5 seconds. And sometimes you don't know, sometimes a lot of folks that might be watching and driving their own car, unless you've had, someone like Robby come drive your car or somebody to set a benchmark in your exact car, the best you can go off of is maybe your theoretical time or, your Apex score, because it's going to show you your basic, grip usage out of 100%. Those are 2 things that can clue you into how much is left. But those are just steps that are they're just incremental things that are using what you've already done. You might be able to unlock some knowledge and some technique that would totally change your theoretical, because all of a sudden you're going substantially faster in a sector than you were before or something. So that's something to think about as well. But let's go ahead and wrap it up. We've been on for about an hour or so, and we'll have to do this again. I think doing some sort of a webinar would be a really good way to tie this up. And
yeah, totally.
Folks, while you're watching, we've got a couple of webinars coming up for Apex Pro. On Friday, we've got the Apex Score webinar, so we're going to talk about what the lights mean and what they're based on. And hint, hint, we'll go back to that friction circle thing a lot. So we'll talk about that again. And then next week, I believe it's next week, maybe the week after next, April 15th, whenever that is, tax day. Not anymore, because all that stuff's been changed because what's going on. We're having a speed trace webinar. So we're going to talk about desirable shapes in the speed trace, undesirable shapes in the speed trace, how to produce desirable shapes, what some of that stuff means. So y'all check that out on Apex Track Coach. How do people keep up with Robby Foley? What do they need to do to follow along with you?
Yeah, if you guys want, you can follow me on Instagram at Foley Racing RFR. It's kind of an interesting Instagram name, but when I made it, all the ones I wanted were taken. So Foley Racing RFR on Instagram and Twitter, or just you can add me on Facebook at my personal page, Robby Foley on Facebook. Trying to keep up with some sim racing these days, and just try to stay fit when we do go back to racing. But follow me on there.
Yeah, I heard you gave Lando Norris a hard time on iRacing the other day.
Yeah, we had some good fun. There's a lot of cool races going on these days, just with all the drivers across the world not being able to leave their houses. It's a good excuse to play a lot of racing games and, get on the sim. So there's some people organizing lots of big races, like IMSA and IndyCar, NASCAR, all doing it officially. And then there's some groups of guys getting people together to do some racing. So that's been a lot of fun and a good way to pass some time.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's frustrating I don't have space to set up my sim. I'll probably find somewhere before this is all said and done. Whip the old G27 back out.
Yeah,
but
that's the old faithful. That's what I had before this thing. But
yeah, that's a different level. I drove one of the gear driven. I've driven several of them, and it's a different deal. It changes the whole game when you're holding, even just holding a wheel that's made out of the right material. All of a sudden, you feel like you're in the, it makes a big difference.
Totally.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, we'll sign off. We'll see you. I believe we've got a trail breaking Facebook Live discussion with Matt Romanowski from trailbreak.net coming up here in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned. We'll talk a little bit more about some trail breaking. So thanks, Robby.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. See you later.
Cool. I stopped the live stream.
Cool.
It's that easy. Just hit stop, and then all of a sudden
well, imagine it's not stopped.
Yeah. Let me go look at the I'll send you some of the results when I have some more stuff in.
Cool. It's good fun. Good to
cool.
Talk about what we do.
I think we'd having the conversation more and kind of talking about like because really the value of like the webinars is not necessarily just like what you say and the content, but it's the feeling that people get when they participate. So the better our like handoffs and our like how we communicate what we're trying to say would be really good. So maybe we just do why is coasting not bad?
Yeah, just like a short little one and explain that. Yeah, or maybe make it like a series or something. I don't know.
Yeah, we could do we could do a series of webinars about coasting, maybe do 2 or 3, and I'll make it like one product. And, you sign up for all of them basically. Yeah. And we could just do like, 3 in a row. And by the third one, we'll be firing on all cylinders. We'll make it like, $50 a pop, or we'll figure out or we'll bundle it and just do like $99 for all 3 or something. Yeah. Something that's a perceived value. And then we'll split the income. Cause that's, I think I had 15 people on one last week, and, I've got like 7 or 8 signed up for this one on Friday. So it'll be helpful to have some more promotional power.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. All right, man. I'm going to head home and make some dinner.
Okay, right on. Talk to you later.
Thank you. Peace out.
No worries. Later. Bye. Later.